All right, good morning and welcome to today's webinar on behalf of Lee Summit Cares. Lee Summit Cares is a nonprofit organization that seeks to mobilize community partners to develop a culture of physical and mental wellness for Lee Summit youth and families that inspires positive, healthy choices. To learn more about Lee Summit Cares, you can visit their website at www.lscares.org. My name is Carrie Gray, and I'm a licensed mental health professional with Rediscover Mental Health, and I'll be presenting today's webinar on the topic of cyberbullying. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about what cyberbullying is and the most common places where it's likely to occur. You're going to also learn ways to reduce the risk of your child engaging in cyberbullying or being targeted. And as we wrap up the webinar, you'll get some additional resources so you'll know where to go to get more information. So let's start first by defining what cyberbullying is. It's helpful to think in terms of the lens of bullying in general, which is bullying is an unwanted aggressive behavior that is repeated over time and includes a real or perceived imbalance of power. So when we think of bullying, sometimes gets confused with rude behavior or typical peer conflict, but there are some essential differences here. First off, with rude behavior, it's something that's typically not intentional. An example of rude behavior would be sarcasm. Well, we know that sarcasm is not good in relationships. Many people do use sarcasm. A second piece would be knowing what conflict is. And when we think in terms of conflict between youth, typically we see an equal balance of power where the conflict is reciprocal, meaning both sides are contributing to that. And they're both also motivated in some way to resolve that conflict. With bullying, it's one-sided. And it's something that is repeated over time, especially when the bully gets an emotional reaction from the target with whom they are targeting. That only encourages the bully to do it more. And in addition to that, we often see a real or perceived imbalance of power. Now let's apply this to cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is bullying that takes place over digital devices like cell phones, computers, tablets, as well as gaming devices. In fact, one of the most common places that youth report being cyberbullied is through online gaming sites where they're interacting with other people. And so that's something that we'll talk more about as we go through this webinar. When you think in terms of cyberbullying, it includes sending, posting, or sharing negative, harmful, false, or mean content about someone else. It can include sharing personal or private information that causes humiliation or embarrassment. Some cyberbullying crosses a line into unlawful or criminal behavior. And you'll get a better definition of that as we go through this webinar. Now, as we think in terms of traditional forms of bullying and cyberbullying, there are some unique differences and concerns related to cyberbullying. First off, it's persistence. We now have devices that offer us the ability to immediately and continuously communicate with each other 24 hours a day. And so it can be more difficult for a person who has been targeted to get away from it. Another thing that we need to keep in mind is that cyberbullying oftentimes leaves a permanent mark, meaning most information communicated electronically is permanent and public. if it's not reported or removed. And so a negative online reputation, including for those who bully others, can impact things such as college admissions, future employment opportunities, as well as other areas of the individual's life. And finally, cyberbullying can be hard to notice because teachers and parents may not overhear or see cyberbullying takes place. It is harder to recognize. And so keep in mind these unique qualities as we look at things that can be done to prevent and how we respond when cyberbullying situations occur. Now, I mentioned earlier that I would share some of the more common places where we're finding that our youth are being cyberbullied. And this certainly correlates to where they spend their time. And at this point in time, this slide provides a snapshot of some of the more common places where our youth are spending time. Now, the key here is this is something that's constantly evolving. And so a wonderful resource for you is Common Sense Media, and they provide information and updates on trends and how our kids are using social media and other platforms, in addition to some of the risks in using that platform, as well as safety measures. So here are some of the commonly used apps. Instagram, which is a free online photo sharing application, as well as a social network platform. Another popular one is TikTok, which is a short form video sharing app that allows users to create and share short videos. TikTok was recently in the news because of a TikTok challenge that was put out where students were vandalizing bathrooms and videotaping this happening at their schools. Another one is Snapchat, and it's a popular messaging app that allows users to take and exchange videos, which are referred to as snaps, that are meant to disappear after viewed. The thing about Snapchat is that oftentimes kids view this app as once a picture is taken and sent, they'll never see it again. But many kids know that they can also take a quick screenshot of anything that is shared, which would make it more permanent. The third one, or excuse me, another one here is referred to as GroupMe, which is a mobile group messaging app. And in working with kids in the elementary schools and middle schools, a lot of them are using different types of messaging apps. And they've even shared that they've seen those apps being used as a way to cyberbully peers, meaning they might start a discussion where people are talking negatively about a peer and then invite that peer into the conversation, and they are able to see everything that was said about them. I do want to keep in mind, though, that the majority of kids are using these apps and platforms in the way in which they were intended to be used. And so do keep that perspective as we consider some of the risks and possibilities that are there in terms of cyberbullying. Now, here's a description that provides more information about the types of things that kids are doing online. Posting comments or rumors about someone online that are mean, hurtful, or embarrassing, threatening to hurt someone or telling them to kill themselves, posting a mean or hurtful picture or video. And the picture piece is a place where cyberbullying can cross that line into criminal or unlawful behavior. An example of this that sadly happens more frequently than we'd like to imagine is where a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship takes place, and perhaps the male asks for a nude photo of the female. And during that relationship, the girl does this, sends it to the male, who then, after the breakup, decides to share that video publicly with friends and other acquaintances. Now, where that becomes a criminal behavior, aside from being unethical and terrible, is that they're essentially holding on to pornography. And so the person who has, or the people who have that picture even sent to them, are now in possession of that. And so that gets into an area where now it can easily become a criminal investigation for having that pornography on that device or distributing it as well. Another thing that youth sometimes do is to pretend to be someone else online in order to solicit or post personal or false information. And so pretending to be someone who you're not as a way of misleading folks in getting the information. And sometimes this happens in different chat rooms. Kids, even as young as high school, are looking at different dating apps as ways to meet people their age with similar interests. And they need to be aware that not everyone on those apps is who they say they are or reflects that picture that's being shared through that app. And then the final one, and this is just an overview, there are many other ways in which people do cyberbully, but would be posting mean or hateful names, comments, or content about any race, religion, or personal characteristic. And so you can see that a lot of the tactics that people use are very chilling. Cyberbullying is very hurtful, and there's reasons why there are laws that protect youth from bullying and cyberbullying, because we know the impact of these behaviors can create permanent or long-term issues in those who are targeted, but also for those who witness this type of behavior. And we also know that kids who or youth who engage in cyberbullying or traditional bullying oftentimes have issues going on in their own life that are causing them to act out in an aggressive way that needs to be addressed. And so when we respond to cyberbullying, it's important that we consider all three: the person who's doing the bullying, the people who are witnessing that behavior, as well as the person or persons who are being targeted. Now, I mentioned and I put together a special slide on online gaming, because the research that is out there is showing that this is the online gaming is the most common place where youth are being bullied online. And so I do want to say some positive things about online gaming before I dive into the risks here on the slide. We know that there are some benefits, which would include cognitive, emotional, and social skills that are developed as kids engage in the games. We also know that they're developing problem-solving skills and learning how to strategize. We know that multiplayer team games provide opportunities to also learn how to cooperate with each other. And for many, it's an opportunity to make new friends and to socialize with people who have similar interests. And so it's important to keep in mind that there are benefits to playing online games, but like with anything, we also need to be aware of some potential risk. Some of the things that kids have shared with me is that if they're not performing well, oftentimes players can curse and make negative comments, and they can even exclude a person from being able to play the game. We also know that when players join anonymously or create an avatar, that it allows them to harass and bully others without a whole lot of accountability. And so that's why it's really important that when our kids are engaging with online games with other people, that they know who they're communicating with, because that will reduce the risk of cyberbullying. In addition to that, some participate, meaning for the wrong reasons. Some people participate in the games to get personal information from players. And so we can look at this in terms of what is referred to as the grooming process. We know that predators will go to places where youth are. And so they might join a game pretending to be another youth of that age. And then as they get to know each other and socialize and become friends, start asking more and more personal information that can obviously create tremendous problems down the road if a person then is wanting to meet up or, things along those lines. So do keep that in mind. Another thing to be aware of is that cyber criminals may cause harm by posting links that appear game related, but are viruses or malware. And so it's important that our kids know not to open any link that is shared because not everyone has good intentions, but rather to let the parents know about these things that are being shared, especially if it's something that causes the child to feel uncomfortable or threatened in any way. So do keep in mind the risks of online gaming and know that there's certainly ways to reduce these risks by, number one, choosing to engage in the public games with people whom the child knows in person. Now, our next slide focuses on potential warning signs of cyberbullying. As I mentioned early, oftentimes cyberbullying is difficult to detect. And as our kids get older, what we're finding is that in middle school, for example, and high school, that they're much more likely to talk to a peer about an experience that they've had online rather than reaching out and talk to a parent. And that has nothing to do with the parent-child relationship. It just has to do with the development of our teenagers at that time in their life. And so here are some cues just to be watching for that you do need to notice and ask more questions that are sharing. This could be a real problem. One would be a noticeable increase or decrease in use, so changes in that behavior. An emotional response to what is happening. So for example, let's say that your child is on their phone and all of a sudden you can see him or her becoming really upset about something. And oftentimes what will happen is if a parent says, hey, what's going on? They're reluctant to talk about it. So another thing to keep in mind is, let's say your child is on a laptop or, working on something through technology, you come by and all of a sudden they shut the top. That's a sign that perhaps they're engaging in something that they shouldn't, or, something needs to be investigated further there. Another sign of possible cyberbullying is when a child starts to avoid social situations that they once enjoyed. And then another one, which can be a severe impact, is where a child becomes withdrawn, depressed, loses interest in people and activities. Another huge warning side is when a child doesn't want to go to school. They have a lot of semantic complaints, stomach aches, things like that, because we know through research again, that if a youth is being bullied online, by someone who attends their school, the likelihood that they're also being bullied at school is extremely high. And so a natural defense mechanism is going to be to stay away from the place where the abuse is happening. And so it's important that we as parents stay tuned in to our kids' behaviors, their emotions, things along those lines. And if we are seeing changes, that those are things that we need to investigate further. Now, our next slide, if I can get this to work correctly, one moment. Sorry about that. I don't know. Okay. There it is. So our next slide talks about things that we can do as parents and caring adults that will help kids fight cyberbullying. And I'll get into these 4 areas in more detail in the next slides that come. But the first would be to define your terms, and this has to do with expectations and limits. Another one is to check in about online life, knowing where they are and what they're doing. A third is to encourage upstanding, because we know that this upstanding or stepping in makes a positive difference in stopping cyberbullying. And then finally, it's a good idea to review worst case scenarios. And so what should your child do if they witness cyberbullying? If it happens to them, what should they do? And this outline and more information about this can be found at Common Sense Education. So let's start first with defining your terms. It's important to set and enforce appropriate boundaries around screen time. Kids have limited self-control, especially as they're moving through their teen years. They're much more likely to gravitate towards things that they enjoy, that bring them pleasure, over the responsibilities of daily life, such as getting their homework done or doing chores. Perhaps as an adult, you can even relate to maybe you have your own social media account, and it can become very addictive scrolling through different things that are happening. And pretty soon we realize, wow, I just lost 40 minutes that I'm not going to get back. And what do I have for that? So our kids are also experiencing that. And so something that we can do to help them is set parameters around how much screen time they have. One specific example that will help our youth in many ways is to have them leave technology in a common area of the house at bedtime. And so what that means is they need to not have access to phones. And many will say, well, that's where my alarm clock is. Well, go ahead to go to the store and get them an alarm clock to be prepared for that, so that you can help them to set that limit, which will help them to also get a better night's sleep. Another one is that it's important that our kids understand what cyberbullying is. And so here is a simple definition that you can provide, and that is repeated and unwanted hurtful or mean words or behavior that occur online. And so talking to our children about how they communicate and the things that they see will open up some doors to some good discussion in terms of perhaps ways in which they could respond to those situations. Then finally, which ties into what I just said, it's important to discuss your expectations for how he or she will communicate online. And we're going to get into that a little bit further in our next slide, which has to do with teaching your child how to be a good digital citizen. One of the things that we know as adults that it's really important to think before we post or comment about anything online. And this is critically important, especially if someone has targeted us personally, because our knee-jerk reaction is going to be to defend ourselves or perhaps try to get even with that person. And so teaching our kids to hit that pause button before they post something or comment is critical. And we have some questions that kids have come up with to help them think about what they're posting as well before they post it. So we need to keep in line the online reputation as well. So our kids need to be told that anything he or she shares online becomes a permanent public record, which may be accessible to schools, employers, colleges, and others researching an individual now or in the future. And so choices that they make, in their youth can have a significant impact on their future. And so it's important that they think about how they want to be perceived online. So the questions that can be helpful would be asking the child to consider, what does this image, post, or comment say about me? How would I feel if I were in this other person's shoes? And a big one again is, what are the possible consequences to me and to others of this post? And so questions that get them to think about consequences, potential consequences before posting or commenting are really important. And I oftentimes, when I do workshops with youth, is have them come up with one question that they need to ask themselves and to post that somewhere. And one of the best ones that I had was a sixth grader who said, my question is, what would Grandma Ruth think? And so I asked him, I kind of got what he was saying, but when he described this, he said, well, I have a lot of respect for Grandma Ruth. And if she were watching over my shoulder, would she think that this was okay for me to post? So that's just another suggestion as far as questions and talking to your kids about being good digital citizens. Now, the next piece is being where our kids are. One example of this is when, depending on your age, like when I was young, we would meet friends at the mall to socialize or go to Sonic and hang out there. Maybe it was the movie theater, or perhaps you can relate to going roller skating. Now, kids are spending a lot of their time online. So think of social media as the new mall, if you will. And so just like we talk to our kids about different aspects of their life, such as how's school going, how are your friendships, activities, it's important that you stay on top of their online life by asking questions such as, who are you chatting with? How do people treat each other in the games and on the sites that you visit or use? Another thing that's important is to visit the social media platforms, gaming sites, and online forums with your child. This way, you'll have an opportunity to understand how platforms work, including important pieces that should be in place, such as how to utilize privacy settings, how to block an individual, and also what policies and procedures are in place to report any offensive content. In fact, if your child is engaging on a platform that doesn't have these protective measures in place, this is a good indicator that this is not a safe platform for them to be engaging on. And so keep that in mind as well. Now, another piece here that I referred to earlier is the importance of upstanding, which essentially is, letting your child know that supporting a friend who is being bullied or an acquaintance, that it does make a big difference. And so there's different ways in which they can do that depending on the scenario as well as the situation. So for example, in some situations, confronting the bully about their behavior is very valuable. And so if a child knows who's doing the bullying, it might even be a friend of theirs, by talking to them about what they're doing and, speaking up about it, that could get that person to rethink their behavior and perhaps stop what they're doing. If not, some other things that a person can do would be to send a private message to the victim, letting them know that, hey, I saw what so-and-so did. I want you to know, that people don't really feel that way about you, again, depending on the situation, but providing some type of supportive comment and letting them know they are not alone and that not everyone feels the way in which this one person does. Another suggestion would be to post a positive comment about the person being targeted. And then also as an observer or witness to report the problem to the platform moderator. And so taking action in those ways is known and proven to help stop bullying. And so in addition to our children being aware of what they should do if targeted, it's also important that they learn what to do if they witness this behavior happening to someone else. And they have a lot of options that are available to them. Now, let's talk though about the worst case scenarios. So let's say that your child is being targeted. The first thing we tell our youth is to stop and step away. And so this gives us an opportunity to get out of fight, flight, fright, where we're likely to not think logically and react impulsively. We know that when a person responds back to a bully, that this is exactly what that person wants. They're getting a response. And so along that line of reasoning, what we find is that ignoring the bully can be very effective because they're not getting any kind of response or attention from that behavior. Now, if the bullying does continue, it's important to save and print any screenshots, texts, or email correspondence. So that way you have a record of the things that have been happening. In addition to that, it's important to be able to block the person. And so that's why when choosing what sites and platforms a child is using, it's important to look at those features and how do they handle those situations, and also how to report any cyberbullying to the online service providers. Places like Facebook and Instagram have become very good about blocking and pulling inappropriate content off their sites. So knowing how to do that is another thing that can happen. Then finally, the last thing, or not necessarily the last thing, but that we want them to tell a trusted adult. And so this might come when a friend, a peer shares something peer-to-peer. That's not the sort of secret that we want to keep, because if someone is being cyberbullied, that's a form of harassment that can certainly have long-term negative impacts on the individual. So this is a situation where if your child, for example, comes to you talking about an experience someone else is having, that is a good thing, that we want to encourage that. So then you can take some appropriate steps as an adult to see what needs to happen in that situation. It's also important that to recognize that A big reason why youth don't want to tell their parents, especially as they get older, middle school and high school, number one, they're embarrassed. And number two, they're fearful that the parent is going to make things 100 times worse. And so this is important to keep in mind, especially if it's a situation that needs to be addressed at the school as well, because of the connection between the cyberbully and your child and that child being at the same school. So we're going to look at that here. Cyberbullying, fortunately, like I had mentioned earlier, there are laws in the state of Missouri to protect youth from bullying as well as cyberbullying. And it's important to keep in mind this perspective if you should have to report a problem to the school. The key is that social behavior affects academic achievement. And so we know that successful schools focus on decreasing academic failure and problem behaviors, including bullying, and increasing opportunity for all students to fully participate in learning. So essentially, if a behavior such as bullying is impacting a child's ability to feel safe at school, they're not going to be able to learn. That's a higher order thing. So safety has to come first before the child can learn. If a child doesn't even feel comfortable going to school because they feel like they're going to be harassed when we're there, then that's going to interfere with the learning process, because we know they're going to learn better when they're in the classroom. So what does this mean in terms of laws? According to House Bill 1583, district employees must report incidences of bullying of which the employee has firsthand knowledge within 2 school days. A designated school official must start an investigation within 2 days of receiving any report of bullying. The investigation must be completed within 10 school days of the initial report. And so there's measures in place to initiate the process and to complete an investigation, which would include a process for, responding when these allegations are true, and protecting the child who is bullied while allowing for consequences for the child doing the bullying, as well as interventions. But it's something that is put within a time frame in terms of this happening. So a few additional tips to keep in mind, though, if you do have to contact the school. We want them to be able to listen to you and pay attention to what you need to share, because this is very critical information. And the reality is, if we go to a situation and we're angry and we're saying things like, I'm going to get my attorney, and we're threatening, that's going to put the other human being that you're talking to in fight, flight, freeze. And so we want the school, and they intend to want to be on our side too. The school wants to protect the learning environment so that kids can learn and thrive. Obviously, the parent wants to protect their youth so that they're not being harassed or bullied at school. And so take time to prepare for the meeting, focused on the facts. And so that would include describing what has taken place, for how long, and any steps that have been taken to stop the cyberbullying. And so that would go back to, blocking the person, reporting the problem. If the person is, knows who it is, maybe even addressing that situation with a parent. In addition to that, it's important to be able to share any evidence. And so remember, bullying and cyberbullying are things that happen over a period of time. And so if you have copies of, text messages or other posts and things that are showing the time frame there, that is also useful information. And then we want to work with the school to resolve the problem. Let's assume everybody's on the same page. And finally, include your child or teen as much as possible in the process. They need to know what's going on. They need to be a part of that process so that they can communicate any concerns they have, assert their needs in terms of solutions and what would help them to feel safe in that school environment. And that also helps to empower the child and give them a sense of control in that situation where, as I mentioned in the definition, there is an imbalance of control. So including the child or teen in the process is a critically important part of the healing process. And so some additional resources, I am going to pause and see if there's any questions that you might have, but these are some wonderful resources that are available online. The NetSmarts organization has just great games and quizzes and things to evaluate screen time for your kids. Common Sense Media provide some of the content for today. Stopbullying.gov and Connect Safely provide many resources. Then, of course, the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that 1-800 number is a place that can be called for consultation in a situation that involves harassment or bullying. And so that is all the information that I have for you today. And so does anyone have any questions? And I'm going to go ahead